Hello and welcome back to Conversations in Sustainability, your monthly podcast where we take a deep dive into some of the most fascinating and complex environmental topics shaping Australia. Each episode we talk to an industry leader who's on the ground working at the pointy end of a sustainability challenge. We unpack what barriers they're facing and what insights they've learnt along the way. I'm your host, Alice Johnson, and today it's my pleasure to be joined by a woman who heads up one of Australia's most trusted and respected environmental brands. They're the team behind some of our most beloved and iconic environmental education programs. They're now leading the charge on building a carbon-neutral circular economy for Australia. She's also one of the nicest people in sustainability and someone I've had the pleasure of working with for a number of years. Today's guest is Rebecca Gilling, CEO of Planet Ark. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me, Alison. What a lovely introduction. Thank you.
So I can't speak for our future guests, but it's safe to say to date you are the first and only Conversations in Sustainability guest with an IMDb page. Return to Eden, young doctors. It's not a conventional career path. Silver screen to CEO. How did that happen?
No, not conventional at all. Much of my life hasn't been terribly conventional, and this is certainly an example. Look, I had a successful 30-year career as an actor, but I had always felt that it wasn't my true calling. I felt a bit of a fraud, and I know that there are so many actors who would have given their eye teeth for the opportunities that I was handed. Of course, this was the 70s, and things were a hell of a lot easier then when my career began. I was a celebrity ambassador for one of Planet Ark's recycling campaigns, a steel can recycling campaign. And I had been working in television on a program that came to an end after 9 years, a couple of weeks before Christmas in 2001, following the sad death, of course, of Shirley Strawn of Skyhooks fame, who was one of my co-hosts on the program that I was working on at the time. And one of the founders of Planet Ark was a neighbour of mine in the Blue Mountains, and he drove past when I was out walking and stopped and said, "What are you up to?" And I said, "I've just been made redundant." And he said, "Come and work for us."
Really?
I said, "Well, what would I do? I haven't been trained for anything much apart from what I've been doing for the past 30 years. He said, "Don't worry, we'll dream it up."
The rest is history.
That was 22 years ago, and I've done a great many things with the organisation since, used my knowledge of film and television to good effect, I think, to help in the production and post-production of our community service announcements and other communications. So I was the public face of the organisation and still am to a large degree. But I also got trained in video editing, so I could do the back end as well. And I took on the HR function, which wasn't in existence at the time, and stuck around long enough that I ended up in the top job.
And there's been a fair bit of activity over the years. There's some really iconic programs. Like we were just saying before we started that, for me, I grew up in the dirt. I was a pretty dirty, grubby child in nature. So Tree Day was just like a dream for me. Loved to go out there and plant some trees. Everything I learnt about recycling as a kid was through National Recycling Week. So there's some really formative environmental experiences for Australians came through Planet Ark programs.
Yes.
But I'm guessing these have changed a bit over the years, haven't they? Have the programs evolved in your time?
Oh, most certainly. Take Tree Day, for example. It was the original idea was a combination of regenerating local environments, putting plants back in the ground to support local wildlife, but also to build community and provide opportunities for community engagement. But more recently, we've become aware of increasing bodies of evidence around the health and well-being benefits of spending time in nature. And you and I both know that we had that benefit as as children. It wasn't, we were both free-range kids, I think, but those opportunities are less and less available to the young today. And at the same time, we know there's a rise in attention deficit issues, in anxiety, and particularly eco-anxiety amongst the young as well as people of our ages. Not comparing your generation with mine, of course. So I think really taking up the mantle of trying to emphasise the importance of that contact with nature, particularly for kids, because we have Schools Tree Day ahead of National Tree Day every year, to give them a sense of hope and a positive action, which is really what Planet Ark has always been about since its beginning. I mean, I think one of the things that distinguished us at the start from other environmental groups who had a focus on advocacy and pointing up the very, very real problems that we face. Planet Ark's modus operandi has always been about positive environmental action.
I want to touch on that individual action point, because it's something that makes Planet Ark so wonderful. It gives you those powerful tools to make a change. But increasingly and overwhelmingly, the research shows that the issue and the responsibility is really it lies with industry. The Guardian reported that 80% of the world's global CO2 emissions come from just 57 businesses recently. Like, how do you marry that up? Because I know there is a lot of backlash against businesses who are communicating that consumers need to make a change when really responsibility does lie at their feet. How do you strike that balance between corporate responsibility but also keeping consumers engaged and passionate?
Yes, it's a very good point. I think it's now known that the whole idea of the individual carbon footprint was an invention of big oil to throw responsibility back onto consumers to allow them to carry on business as usual without taking responsibility. However, I think we are seeing more and more that governments are legislating. We are following a fairly long way behind Europe, I suppose, in regulating all sorts of areas of concern. For example, things like right to repair. The fact that businesses of a certain size need to now report on their emissions, and the fact that the community, I think. One of the things that has sort of conned us in a way is the idea that really emerged in the 80s with Thatcherism and Reaganism, that we are all consumers. That the notion of community was a bit of a furphy. We just needed to keep consuming and everything would be fine. But we're not just consumers, we're also citizens. And we're finding that citizens are demanding more and more that businesses step up to the mark. So we see shareholder activism and demands for businesses to take greater responsibility, take their ESG responsibilities seriously. So I think we are seeing that happen. We're also seeing, alongside increasing governments increasing appetite to regulate and legislate. So we've particularly around areas like product stewardship, which is an area of particular interest to Planet Ark. So we're seeing the federal government in Australia making noises about product stewardship schemes for packaging, for sustainable packaging coming soon, and also for e-waste, which we know is one of the largest sources of growing sources of waste in Australia and elsewhere. Absolutely.
And do you think that stronger legislation is the framework we need? Do you think that's the critical piece that's missing at the moment?
I think it's absolutely key to making the changes that are necessary. It creates the level playing field, sets the tone for the country. Yeah. What you can do with the stroke of a legislative pen is vastly more powerful than the best will in the world for voluntary action. We've seen that time and time again.
Yeah. Thinking about the voluntary action, we know from the research that people are thinking about environmental issues. It's hanging in there. Climate change on the list of issues people are worried about. Cost of living, housing crisis. These things are obviously dominating what people are thinking and worrying about. But it is still up there. But then people aren't always taking action. We see this with recycling all the time. There's a level of awareness about recyclability, but not always the follow through. So what is that gap between information and action? How do we jump over that? How do we bridge that gap between the knowledge and the change that we actually need?
Look, it's really a very challenging business, and really it's what Planet Ark has been attempting to do for the whole of its life. And it's not just, as you say, about education. Changing people's habits is really hard, and that's the work that needs to be done. But again, if the regulatory environment encourages that and it's made easy for consumers, it's part of the behaviour change science is really about removing the barriers for positive action.
What sort of things are we talking about? What are some barriers?
Lack of knowledge, obviously, but access to systems that allow people to do things simply. So, when we started, for example, back in the early 90s, recycling was in its nascency. And the system was very basic. We're now at a point where it's really quite sophisticated in terms of what you can drop off at home, but also what you can put in your bins at home, but also what you can drop off for recycling. So that's one area where I think we've seen a big change. We're also, again, coming back to businesses having a sense of needing to do this stuff for their own brand appearance. We're seeing greater use of recycled materials in packaging, for example. So companies getting out in front and wanting to champion the good works that they do, and that's what a part of what Planet Ark does as well. It works with businesses who are on a path to sustainability and helps to get their good work out into the public domain, as also a role model for other businesses to follow.
So you do a lot of brand partnerships. What sort of expectations do you put for your corporate partnerships? You, I assume, need to see some pretty rigorous proof points that they are on a particular trajectory.
Absolutely. We put them through a fairly rigid vetting process before we engage in anything like endorsing environmentally preferred products, for example. But also, we recognise we are a pragmatic organisation. We recognise that organisations will be at various points on a path to sustainability and may have one area of their business that is doing really well and others not so well. I'll give you the example of Toyota, which has been a sponsor of National Tree Day for the last 25 years. Now, they introduced the hybrid vehicle into Australia, but they also sell massive numbers of SUVs and energy guzzling vehicles as well.
Yes.
But their support of National Tree Day allows us to go out and provide the wherewithal to communities to get involved and do that positive work that makes them feel good and makes a difference in their local environments.
So you mentioned National Tree Day. A lot of the programs you do are big focal points, National Tree Day, National Recycling Week, but these are always on issues. So for communicators, how do you keep that energy and engagement with consumers or whichever audience on the radar all the time without that big focal point?
It's very challenging. I mean, back in the day, we had the community service announcement space more or less to ourselves, and it was a very simple way of getting messages out. Of course, younger generations hardly watch television anymore, so that means is not really all that potent anymore. Social media obviously is one of those ways in which you keep issues on the agenda. You've got to keep it fresh and you've got to keep it engaging. Humour is obviously very important as well. Giving people a sense of hope and inspiring positive action, I think, is one of the ways to keep people engaged and looking for greater opportunities, because we know that, for example, National Tree Day, we would regard as a gateway environmental activity. So recycling the same. You do this one activity, you get the benefit of feeling that you've done a good job, and you look for other opportunities to further your to do better environmental work.
Yeah. You mentioned hope. How important is that for communicators who are thinking about how to frame particular issues? Is there particular emotional approaches that are more effective? Is there ever, there's a lot of overwhelming information out there. I assume that the shame message isn't as effective. What are the touch points that really can drive engagement with a particular topic?
Look, you can't shy away from the difficult issues we face. It's really important that people are open eared and open-eyed about the situation that we're in. But hope is hugely important. Otherwise, the flip side of that is despair, and that just implies inactivity and sticking your head under the doona. So you've really got to give people a sense of what's possible. I'm a great fan of the American essayist and columnist Rebecca Solnit, whose book Hope in the Dark is a must-read for anybody who's feeling overwhelmed by eco-anxiety. And she takes the view that hope is distinct from optimism, which implies that things will be all right regardless of what I put into it. And against pessimism, which says that it's all going to hell in a handcart and nothing I do is going to make a difference. She says the future is unknown, but that very fact that it's unknown also implies possibility. And in the space of possibility and hope, there is action. And that's really what it's about. It's inspiring action through giving people a sense of hope that their actions will make a difference, whether they be their individual actions or their collective actions to advocate for change at higher levels.
Just thinking about the scale of the task ahead of us in terms of meeting our emissions targets, we're going to have to do some pretty radical redesign and rethink the systems and ways we go about things. Are there any examples of new ways of thinking about the way we operate that could make a real difference in this space?
I think one of the things that could really make a difference is a move to a 4-day working week. We've seen it being trialled in all sorts of places around the world and proved to be successful in terms of productivity and staff well-being and all the rest. But the other side of this is the reduction in emissions that can happen as a result of a 4-day working week, and giving people the opportunity to put down the tools, get out, connect with their communities, do activities that are not don't revolve around excessive consumption of materials, and resources, but also of energy. Just spending time doing what people used to do, gathering around the family table and sharing a meal. All of those things I think we've lost sight of in the incredible drive to productivity and economic growth. And we've lost a lot along the way, both in human terms, but also in environmental terms.
So just doing less might be a big part of it.
I think it's a really big part. Having time, and for our children as well, just to sit and muse and think and allow your mind to range over things is something that, the opportunity to be bored. I mean, my childhood was sort of punctuated with, "Mum, I'm bored." And she would say things like, "Oh, go and sweep the path," or, go for a walk or something like that. But I think having that opportunity to just be still is hugely important for people and for the environment.
So to round out, everything Planet Ark thinks about is about these individual actions. So for all the listeners, what are the 3 things that we should be going away and doing today? What are the 3 things that will make a real difference and really, move the dial on environmental issues? Is it, I often hear about changing my super fund, and that's something I'm often thinking about. Is that the thing I should go and do?
Oh, absolutely, change your super fund, and not just to one that is negatively screening out the bads, but one that is positively screening, looking for opportunities to invest in the technologies that are and the businesses that are going to make the changes. So that's hugely important. I think, again, getting back to the actions of consumers, being a conscious consumer, we know that we are consuming over 100 billion tonnes of the Earth's resources every single year. And it is staggering and it's frightening. And we need to reduce that by at least a third to have any hope of staying below 1.5 degrees of warming. Because what I think people don't necessarily focus on is the fact that in order to achieve net zero, 55% of that work will be done by the switch to renewable energy. The remaining 45% will be how we source, use, and then dispose of or reuse materials. So for consumers, what we're at pains to point out to people is the need to move up the ladder of ours, and this, whether you're a consumer or a business. We've talked about recycling for the whole of the Planet Ark's history, but we now need to be talking much higher up around refusing and reducing our use of valuable resources. Redesign is hugely important because we know that about 80% of the impact of a product is locked in at the design phase. So as a consumer, and businesses are consumers as well, so when you're thinking about your inputs into your business or the things that you consume as an individual or a household, look for ways in which you can build to last or buy things that are built to last. Be involved in the sharing economy, or if you're a business, change your business model to product as a service. We're seeing that more and more.
Any interesting examples?
Well, we can see it with all sorts of transport options now. I mean, Uber is essentially product as a service, and a lot of young people today, who, particularly city dwellers, don't bother owning a car because it's an inconvenience. So those are a couple of the ways in which both businesses, I think, and consumers can reduce their resource dependency and ensure that we actually value resources. We stop thinking about waste. We start to think about resources and change our relationship with the things, the stuff in our lives. Go for value and second-hand where possible. And,
love a Vinnie's shop.
Love a Vinnie's shop, absolutely. Look for those opportunities to avoid making unnecessary purchases, I suppose, is an important one. Finally, look, I'm an incredibly keen gardener, and I'm aware of these days of the privilege that is inherent in having the opportunity to have a garden. So many of my young colleagues are renters in flats and long to have that opportunity. They garden in pots on their balconies.
Oh, yeah, houseplant generation, that's
the
me.
The houseplant generation, absolutely. But there are opportunities to join your local community garden, and we're seeing more and more of those crop up around the place. And I think that's so important to give people that sense of connection with the systems that support life on the planet. So if you've never gardened before, get yourself a pot plant and nurture it. Join your local community garden. Look for that opportunity, because that's another way in which I feed my sense of hope. You can't be a gardener and not have a sense of hope.
What a beautiful spot to finish on. Beck, a huge thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Conversations in Sustainability, a podcast by the Green Horizon team. We're specialists in sustainability communications, from the circular economy to the energy transition and food waste to electric vehicles. We live and breathe these issues day in, day out. To check out our work and hear from some of our clients, head to greenhorizon.au.